Tens of thousands of years ago, Ice Age hunters crossed a land bridge over the Bering Strait that then linked Siberia to Alaska. They slowly made their way south on the North American continent. By 20,000 BC, the nomadic hunters had entered the untamed land of what is now called Mexico. It was a volatile geologic region where volcanoes belched fire and massive earthquakes struck with sudden devastation. Undaunted, they pursued giant herds of bison and deer into the cool grassland of the high plains between the jagged mountains of the Sierra Madre. Near present-day Mexico City, they found a tempered climate around 5 shallow interconnected lakes. By 1500 BC, the hunters were cultivating the valley's rich volcanic soil. They grew crops that still form the basis of the Mexican diet: corn, beans, and chili peppers.
The Valley of Mexico became the cradle of Mexican civilization because of the availability of water. The waters of the lake were used for agricultural purposes. And because of the climate and the availability of water, sometimes you could get 2 and 3 harvests a year, making it possible to support a large urban population. And this formed the basis of the original Mexican civilization.
By 200 BC, just as Rome began its rise to glory, so did the first great empire of ancient Mexico, in the incredible city of Teotihuacan. Called the City of the Gods, Teotihuacan covered 12 square miles in a high valley near present-day Mexico City.
Teotihuacan is a huge city. Estimates for its population run as big as 250,000 people. At the time it was inhabited, it was either the largest city in the world or very close to it. It's huge.
The ancient city was dominated by 2 massive temples, the Pyramid of the Sun on one side and the Pyramid of the Moon on the other. 215 feet high and 700 feet wide at the base, the Pyramid of the Sun was more massive than most of the great pyramids of Egypt. By the 6th century, though, the Teotihuacan Empire, as powerful as it was overrun by hostile tribes from the north, and the city was abandoned. Far to the south, in the Yucatan, another ancient civilization thrived. The Maya, who dominated much of Central America, built stunning cities of stone like Chichen Itza and Palenque. Hieroglyphic writings tell of embattled city-states ruled by priest-kings, of gory religious rituals that included bloodletting, piercing, and human sacrifice, of Mayan rain gods who were placated by tossing victims into a deep well.
Looking at it from our more enlightened point of view today, we might be appalled when we think about what the indigenous people of Mexico would do in the realm of human sacrifice, the burning at the stake, the eating of organs. But that was just part of what it was, the culture was here. Also keep in mind, there were very many highly ritualistic, ugly ceremonies going on in Europe at the hands of the Catholic Church also.
In many ways, the Mayans were more advanced than their European counterparts. Mayan mathematicians understood the concept of the 0 centuries before the Europeans. Ironically, though, these great scientists never discovered the wheel or unlocked the secrets of metals. For all their accomplishments, their tools and weapons never advanced beyond the Stone Age.
The main characteristic of the American development of pre-Hispanic culture starts from the fact that there is no huge animals that are found in America. And therefore, you're not going to develop the wheel because there is nobody to pull the wheel. You're not going to develop the plow because there is nobody to pull the plow.
hundreds of miles north of the Mayan civilization, was Tula, capital of a tribe of fierce warriors called the Toltecs. The Toltec god, Tezcatlipoca, was among the cruelest of all Mexican deities, demanding human hearts as sacrifice.
The Toltecas, which is the name of the inhabitants of Tula, became sort of a sacred name in ancient Mexico. If you were a Tolteca, you were a great person, you were a sage, you were a saint, all that sort of thing.
But by 1200 AD, the mighty Toltecs would be supplanted by a tribe that would go on to build the greatest empire of Mexican antiquity. The Central Valley of Mexico was in chaos at the dawn of the second millennium. The collapse of the Toltec Empire found numerous tribes locked in the fierce struggle for power. Among them, a small nation of Aztecs who were very late arrivals to the valley, migrating south around 1250 AD. Tough and warlike, the Aztecs eventually settled on an island in the midst of Lake Texcoco in the Central Valley. They were guided to the land by an ancient prophecy.
The Aztecs were actually latecomers to the Central Valley of Mexico. According to Mexica or Aztec theology, they were told to build their capital where they found an eagle sitting on a nopal cactus devouring a serpent. And they found this strange combination on that island in the middle of the lake. And of course, that's the symbol that is depicted on the Mexican flag today.
Though seen as primitive nomads by those already in the valley, the Aztecs quickly adapted to their new environment. By 1300 AD, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan emerged as the greatest city in the New World. Surrounded by a watery moat 3 to 5 miles wide, the city was safe from attack. To overcome a lack of farmland, the Aztecs built ingenious artificial islands called chinampas.
What you do is you take earth from the bottom of the lake and you start putting it on top to make a sort of artificial island, which you fix by planting large trees as to form a rectangle. Once you are above the level of the water, you have a very stable environment, very humid, and you can grow up to 3 crops a year, and you get a high productivity.
Secure from attack and well provided with food, the Aztecs flourished. By the year 1500, the city had grown to 5 square miles and was home to as many as 200,000. Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities in the world at the time, 4 times the size of London. At the heart of the city was a towering pyramid, 200 feet high, topped by twin temples, one for the god of the sun and war, the other for the god of rain. Around the temple plaza were the dwellings of the emperor, nobility, and priests. They lived in airy, multi-story palaces of brightly painted stucco, some with as many as 50 rooms. The power of the Aztec Empire soon spread far beyond the walls of Tenochtitlan. The fierce legions of the Mexica, as the Aztecs called themselves, conquered most of central and southern Mexico. From the southern jungles of the Yucatan to the northern deserts, Aztec influence stretched over 100,000 square miles and controlled up to 15 million people.
By 1428, they owned the Valley of Mexico. And then they start expanding out of the Valley of Mexico. Their first expansion is into the Valley of Morelos, Cuernavaca. They conquered Morelos and Guerrero to the south. They get cotton and they get gold, which is what those produced. Then they go to Veracruz. Then they start going to Oaxaca.
Tribute from subject tribes poured in, filling the empire's coffers and crowding the city's great market.
Every day there are all kinds of merchandise from all the provinces. Jewels of gold and silver, precious stones, many colored feathers, slaves every side and waiting. Maize, beans, cocoa, peppers, onions, and 1,000 kinds of green stuff. Bernal Diaz.
As wealthy and powerful as the Aztecs were, they waged war not only for land or gold, but for the blood and hearts of prisoners to be sacrificed to the pantheon of angry and vengeful gods. Aztec priests conducted human sacrifice on a scale unseen in the history of man. They believed that human blood was a god's proper nourishment, and their bewildering array of over 1,500 deities required a steady diet of victims.
The Aztecs thought that the universe was going to end, and the only way to keep it going was through the human sacrifice. The main reason was a religious belief that if you didn't sacrifice people, the world would finish, will end.
Children were sacrificed to the rain god, their tears ensuring a bountiful sky. Priests, their hair matted with blood, wearing the flayed human skins of victims, celebrated the god of spring. Using obsidian knives, the priests ripped out still-beating hearts as gifts to the hungry gods. During special festivals, thousands of the innocent were led to a gory death on the steps of Tenochtitlan's great temple. In 1494, it was claimed as many as 20,000 hearts were torn out over a period of only 4 days. Some scholars now regard these numbers as an exaggeration.
What does one do with 20,000 cadavers minus a heart? I mean, the logistics of this thing is just absolutely overwhelming. The question that you have to ask here is, oh really? How did they do this?
Aztec sacrifice, I think, has probably been overemphasized in analyses of Aztec religion. There was human sacrifice. The purpose was not to deny human life. The purpose was to propitiate the gods.
At the center of the Aztec world was the king, Moctezuma. Revered like a god, Moctezuma had 3,000 servants and over 1,000 wives and concubines. It was forbidden, punishable by death, to look at his face, touch him, or turn one's back on him. Every aspect of Moctezuma's life was attended to with great ceremony.
When he began his meals, they placed in front of him a sort of wooden screen richly decorated with gold so that no one could see him eat. Bernal Diaz.
As head of the Aztec royal family, Moctezuma was all-powerful, but he was also troubled. He believed and feared an ancient prophecy which foretold the return of a white god named Quetzalcoatl that long ago had come and gone.
When he left, he promised that he would return someday. And he, interestingly enough, his physical characteristics were a fair-complected man with a beard. And this would later prove of certain significance in the conquest of Mexico.
In 1519, the omens gave way to reality as word came from the coast of floating temples upon the sea. Moctezuma was struck with trepidation when he heard the descriptions of the men who sailed in these ships.
Our Lord and King, It is true that strange people have come to the shores of the Great Sea. They have light skin, much lighter than ours. The Crónica Mexicana.
The representation of Quetzalcoatlus in statuary was a face that had a beard and looking at, and I would say, coming from a turtle's mouth, which is very Mesoamerican, but it also could be from a Spanish morion with, the hard hat. This could also make one think, well, hey, this person looks an awful lot like the representation of Quetzalcoatlus.
Moctezuma moaned and wailed in his despair. Sure, the strangers were sent by the god Quetzalcoatl to reclaim his kingdom. Rather than fight, Moctezuma sent emissaries to greet the white-skinned gods from the east and beg them to go away. But the newcomers weren't gods at all, just a few hundred Spaniards. But they were led by Hernán Cortés, a man destined to become the greatest of the conquistadors. On Good Friday, April 22nd, 1519, Spanish explorer Hernán Cortés arrived from Cuba and planted a cross and the red and gold banner of Spain in the Mexican sand, creating a town he called Villarrica de Veracruz, the city of the true cross. In doing so, the stage was set for a clash of civilizations. Hernán Cortés was one of many poor young Spaniards who had come to the New World in search of both glory and gold.
These folks were merchants, maritime people, explorers, outcasts, those kind of folks that you don't necessarily like to associate with in polite company. These people are men of arms because in the 16th century, Europe was a very dangerous place, and everybody who was anybody walked around armed if you could use the weapon, and if you didn't or couldn't use a weapon, then you cowered an awful lot. It was not a nice place. People coming from not a nice place tend to be not nice.
Cortés had arrived in the Western Hemisphere at the dawn of an age of great discovery. The Pope had split the New World between the Spanish and Portuguese to spread Western civilization and the Christian gospel to the Americas. In Cuba, Cortés acquired great wealth using his guile to become protégé and secretary to the Cuban governor, Diego Velázquez, delegate of the King of Spain. The governor named Cortés to command an exploration of the mysterious land to the west, Mexico. Cortés bought a small fleet and raised a 500-man mercenary army. There would be no pay, only the promise of gold, glory, and service to God.
Cortés was in many ways the quintessential Spanish conqueror. He was very smart, but not pensive or intellectual. He was much more a man of action. He had a large ego. He was fearless. He was a person who commanded respect and demanded respect. He was very much a man of his age, and he was the perfect conqueror, the man who was determined to accomplish what he set out to do.
But Cortés almost lost his mission before he set sail. Governor Velázquez grew suspicious of Cortés' loyalty. His suspicions were well-founded, but the messenger he sent to order a stop to the mission got to Cuba too late. Cortés and his men had already set sail. Cortés sailed along the Yucatan to the region of Tabasco, occasionally going ashore to battle the natives. After several unsuccessful skirmishes, local Indian tribes finally sought to appease Cortés bringing gifts of fruit, maize, cloaks, and young women. One was named Marina by the Spaniards. She spoke both Mayan and Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Marina would serve as an invaluable interpreter, as well as Cortés' mistress, becoming one of the most controversial figures in Mexican history. A traitor to some, hero to others.
What she is a very intelligent, very wily person. And just think of what she was able to do. She was able to translate between the Indian dialects and Spanish. She was able to negotiate two cultures. She was able to handle all that. So she must have been very talented. And let's not make her the villain because she was used by this imperial power. Let's appreciate her for what she actually did, which was quite a lot, and not blame her for the conquest.
On the Gulf Coast, directly opposite Tenochtitlan, where Cortés created Veracruz, there was no town, only empty beach. But for the clever Spaniard, it was a way to assume control of his own destiny and expand his mission as Captain General of a town that did not even exist.
Cortés knew that once he was on the high seas, he was outside of the law. So when he created the royal city of Veracruz on Good Friday, and thus the name, the Villa of the True Cross, he was stepping back inside of the law. And then creating the town council of Veracruz, there was nothing there except the beach, but he, on paper, had created an entity. And it was that entity, the Ayuntamiento of Veracruz, that authorized him to lead them into the interior.
Meanwhile, back in Tenochtitlan, Moctezuma remained unsure whether the light-skinned visitors to the coast were gods. He sent emissaries bearing gifts to greet them.
Go now without delay. Do your reverence to our Lord the God. Say to him, your deputy Moctezuma has sent us to you. Here are the presents with which he welcomes you home to Mexico. Moctezuma.
But Moctezuma's plan backfired. His gifts of gold only whetted the Spaniards' appetite. Cortés made a public display of his military power to Moctezuma's emissaries, confirming their fear that the Spaniards were sent by the gods. The Aztecs had never seen horses and thought steed and rider were one creature. And they saw for the first time the flash of steel swords and fell to the ground at the thundering sound of cannon.
How the cannon roared! A thing like a ball of stone comes out of its entrails, shooting sparks and raining fire. They dress in iron and wear iron cases on their heads. Their deer carry them on their backs, as tall as the roof of a house. Aztec warrior.
When word reached Tenochtitlan, the Emperor Moctezuma was terrified. The all-powerful king moaned and wept. Intrigued by the gifts of gold and the stories of an incredible city far from the coast, Cortés decided to march inland to meet Moctezuma at the Aztec capital. A decision he knew would be unpopular among some of his men.
When Cortés was about to embark upon his march inland from Veracruz, he mustered all of his troops on the beach and asked them, he told them that it was going to be very difficult, that some would lose their lives, some would reap great rewards, but any of them who had doubts should step forward and they could return to Cuba. Some did step forward, and he said, no, you can't return to Cuba. But he knew who his enemies were. He had found a way to draw his enemies out